Welcome back, guests. Good to see you, Geoff. I feel like Mike and I go away for a bit, and you throw like a multi-partisan party.
Well, there was a lot of shoes to fill, and we filled them all, but it seemed like a good time.
It sounded like a really good time. Great to have Caroline back and Brittany.
Next time you have to pin Brittany down for her actual predictions. I would have liked to have heard if she thought Wilkinson was going to get the boot out of cabinet. I was surprised by that, but we'll talk about that later.
Yeah.
Okay.
And Mike,
I'm sure Brittany knew already in advance. That's my guess.
Yeah. She's so inside. She's an insider for sure.
Yeah. Couldn't push harder. And Mike, welcome back. How are you doing this side of the pond?
Fresh from the old country. And I picked up a few things while I was away. I did attend Prime Minister's Question Time in the UK, so you can bet in future episodes I will be dropping little nuggets on that.
That would be fun.
So,
yeah, I'd be curious to hear more about that.
Fun fact, since I think we're about to ask me.
I was about to
that there's actually an MP who brings a dog into the chamber at the House of Commons in Britain as a service dog. So
as a service dog.
A fluffy little golden retriever was lying right in the middle of right in the carpet there in the House of Commons. I thought, how quaint. I haven't seen that in Canada. So there you go.
No, I haven't seen that either.
We've gone to the dogs.
That's a good trivia piece. We should go to the dogs. Might help with just sort of the emotional tenor, if nothing else. Dogs can calm the temperature down.
I might need a service animal after this conversation we're going to have today.
I know. This is good. And I have to say, interprovincial trade is on everyone's lips these days. And Hotel Pacifico, we're doing our part in bringing in content from other provinces, Politico podcast content specifically. And we've got a special pod for you today. It's a crossover pod with the Discourse co-host, Cheryl Oates and Erika Barootes. Cheryl and Erika have their own version of Hotel Pacifico that launched in Alberta around the same time, bringing informed civil public affairs discussion around Alberta politics. In the wake of the federal election and the ongoing Trump tariffs, we thought maybe an ongoing discussion too about Western alienization. Maybe this would be the time for the two of us to come together. Cheryl and Erika, welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah,
glad to be here.
It's great to have you. It's perfect timing. And I knew I've been following your pod. I didn't realize we launched like a week apart.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Great minds.
We're still totally.
Here. We're all still here. We're all still here. Well, in Alberta, I feel like you have the same problem we have. Like Alberta seems to generate some good podcast content, politically speaking.
Yeah, but we just let one get elected and now we don't have as much competition with the strategists anymore.
Is Alberta politics now officially crazier than BC politics?
I feel like every province says like, oh, our province is the craziest, never a dull moment, always so much going on here. Because when you're immersed in it, you know all the details going on in it. Like politics is always a little wild.
Mm-hmm. It's true.
So, yes.
But especially so in Alberta.
I'm gonna say you guys are on a crescendo, I think, and we're in a more chill period. Like if we went back a couple months, I'd give us the crown, but right now I cede it to you too. I cede it to you.
Thank goodness. Thank goodness for election flows, right?
Can't be crazy everywhere all the time.
All right.
We try.
Okay, Cheryl and Erika, can you help us tuck in a bit? Because I think, we are talking, I don't know, within an hour of the new cabinet, Mark Carney's new cabinet being announced. I'm curious I was going to ask you what the voice is for the West. I mean, in BC, we've got one cabinet minister in Gregor Robertson, and I think Alberta was shut out. Is that right?
No, we have two.
We got one.
We have two. Who did I miss? Gregor and...
Jill McKnight from Delta.
Sorry, I just looked at that. Okay, Jill McKnight. And then did Alberta get anyone?
One. Yeah, in Edmonton Center. So Eleanor Elzewski, hope I'm saying that right. She had a lot of lawn signs out. I live in Edmonton Center. And so she was actually a candidate that was across the River Valley and got kind of parachuted over after Randy Boissonneau was quickly informed that he would no longer be a running candidate, which obviously helped Eleanor over here. And Liberals in this area.
Well, that was a Liberal seat, and she just held the Liberal seat. Okay.
It goes back and forth. Usually the tide of who's in government. So it's definitely always one to watch. I was president of the Conservative EDA for 6 years. So sometimes we were in government, sometimes not. But it's been close all the time. James Cumming was the MP here in 2019, so it was blue for a very short period.
Was
But it
Mark
was
Carney's,
mostly,
sorry, Geoff, go ahead.
it was, you say back and forth, but it was blue forever until Cheryl's team came along, right? I mean, that's what I think is interesting and dynamic about Alberta politics is the 2015 election completely changed the channel in terms of the strength and weight of the NDP there. It was
Yeah, we on the right like the vote split, though, that it usually offers us in a federal situation. But yeah, we don't have any red provincially in any way, shape, or form.
no.
I mean, it's worth noting though, and Geoff, thanks for saying that because I think it's very true that the dynamics in Alberta have been a lot different since 2015. And yes, Alberta is still mostly blue, and this probably leads into, our future conversations. But if you look at the Liberal vote in Alberta, it's still like, yes, there's not a lot of Liberal seats, but the Liberal vote is still relatively high, like higher than 2015. And a lot of it comes from the cities. So although you don't see that show up in the seats where Liberals were elected, there's still a ton of progressive vote in Alberta.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
There's Mark Carney's background having grown up in Edmonton, and I hear rumors that he was an Oilers fan. Does
Does that help?
does that
It
does
didn't
that
help the Oilers. They had the
that
Carney curse. The Carney curse.
is that going to cut the mustard at all in terms of federal provincial relations that he has a backstory in Alberta?
I mean, we can cross our fingers and pray it can't get much worse. So
I'm not,
maybe, but
I don't,
no.
but I don't like, truthfully, there's nothing that will really like he could have played on the Oilers. It won't help his relationship with Danielle Smith. Like he is too easy a political villain for Danielle Smith. There is nothing he could possibly do. He could build a pipeline himself and it would not make Danielle Smith happy. Like this is just too easy a political narrative for her.
Say more about that, Cheryl. Like, just more than just like the fact that he's a new Liberal prime minister. Like, what about him, the man, makes him a great target for Danielle Smith?
Well, it's just because he's Ottawa. Like he represents Ottawa to a bunch of frustrated Albertans, and it's not a political narrative. It's not a sentiment that Danielle Smith has to build, which is such a gift to politicians. When you have a narrative and you have a political villain who you don't have to create that you can just pick up on public sentiment, like she's made that her whole identity as the premier of the province, and there's no reason for her to stop. It works for her. Like she gets a bump every time she talks. The money flows to the UCP every time she talks about this stuff. There's no reason for her to stop.
Okay, can we pause and all join hands as Alberta and BC and commiserate? Because I think this group of people, there's a lot of lived experience, a lot of really, we could make a really clear articulation of how the West feels and practically is neglected by Ottawa. But I think one of the things and where we can stop holding hands is I think there's an interesting difference in how that shows up in BC politics versus Alberta politics. And Erika, I'm wondering if you can help me understand that a bit more deeply. Like we all agree, like there's a Laurentian elite out there who, think we're a holiday destination and they come here to ski or go to Tofino or whatever, but they don't get us. They underserve us. How does Alberta from there go to this kind of, and now we got to leave?
Hmm. Well, and it's interesting you asked that because I'm from Saskatchewan, born and raised. I was just there, and even the sentiment there isn't the same as Alberta. And I think that mistakenly to the east, people merge Saskatchewan and Alberta together, and even the conversations around separatism is like, "Oh, Mo's going to come along for the ride." I don't know what it is, but since moving to Alberta 2 decades ago, I think it's just louder. I think that we have been the bread and butter or economic driver for longer, or that our natural resources have been more predominant. I don't know what it is that makes that happen, but we just seem to be way louder about the fact that we're discontent. And natural resources are obviously, I think, where people's minds go to. But I think it's just the people that live here in Alberta that there's more of an appetite of, well, I'm Albertan, that I didn't see growing up in Saskatchewan. It wasn't like I'm Saskatchewan first, and not to say you can't be also Canadian or Canadian first at the same time. I don't really have the answer on why we're so much louder than our other Western counterparts and why we got faster to this result.
What do you think, Mike? Does that natural resource piece sound right to you? Just because as someone who kind of follows how that how close that the natural resources is part of our are part of our identity in BC, maybe in a slightly different way, but
Well, certainly market access is a big, in the public opinion research I've done in Alberta, the grievances over market access are really, to me, come through to me at the heart of it. I think there's some sideshow issues, but there's a real economic grievance there that connects with people's livelihoods, and I think it actually unites urban and rural areas of Alberta on that particular issue. But certainly, Cheryl and Erika, you're the experts, but there's quite a divergence once you leave market access and compare Calgary and Edmonton versus the rest of Alberta, particularly Edmonton, right? But you look at Nenchi's numbers, Nenchi, the leader of the NDP in Alberta, for our BC listeners, is getting lots of traction. Edmonton doing pretty good in Calgary, but once you get into the rural areas, it's still the same story. Conservatives rule the roost. And I find it kind of fascinating to see how Alberta has become this very polarized province all of a sudden, where, it wasn't that long ago the Alberta Liberals were electing MLAs and this little, whatever it was, the Alberta Party, and there was these little.
Mike, I think it's the big difference is oil and gas. I mean,
Yeah.
if you look at the two resource economies, there's the view here in BC, which I'm sure you've heard in the interior, that the raw resources, the raw materials are being generated by them are paying for the entire province, and none of it comes back to them, which is not true factually, but politically has to be nodded to all the time. Alberta is what the province is like BC or Saskatchewan with oil and gas, which is like the monster in the room, which makes it possible not to have sales tax, which makes it possible to do a whole bunch of things. And I think a lot of Albertans have identified with the oil industry in the way that British Columbia's never identified with the forest industry when it was a power. And that's having a huge impact on national politics as they look at equalization and all that kind of stuff. So I could see what drives that, but in my view, it's sort of a funny company town mentality. I think a lot of people in Alberta get furious about how oil companies leave a mess behind when they drill in the fields and all that kind of stuff. But when it comes to pushing on Alberta, everybody's with the oil and gas industry, and it has a huge impact on
But
politics.
it doesn't mean that everyone in Alberta votes the same way, even if they support the oil and gas industry. Because I look at the federal election results, and the Poilievre got 64% of the vote in Alberta. That's way higher than what Danielle Smith gets.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
clearly, there's some people who are driven by other issues provincially, away from UCP and going to the NDP.
Can I just
Okay.
offer,
Yeah.
I don't disagree that there is this piece that oil and gas drives, that Albertans have felt like they've contributed to GDP in a way that other provinces haven't, and yet haven't been recognized for that. But I do think at this particular moment, the reason that we feel this sort of bubbling about separation in Alberta, and you don't feel it in BC, even though BC also might feel ignored, is because we have a premier in Alberta right now that is stoking that
Yeah.
separation
Very
feeling.
important.
Yeah.
And she introduced legislation, the Sovereignty Act, that basically gives her, theoretically, the power to overrule federal legislation. She's initiated numerous court challenges. She has taken every opportunity to stand up and hold a press conference to point out Ottawa overstepping, Ottawa hurting Alberta. Whatever prime minister is in power is bad. She is crowdsourcing for referendum questions right now and encouraging those, making it easier for those who want separation to initiate a referendum on separation by lowering the bar from 600,000 signatures to 177,000 signatures. So basically, she's not coming out and saying, like, if you want to separate, I'm here for it. But she is making the conversation much more elevated and much easier for those who feel that way to have it. And it's gone from what was like a fringe issue in Alberta to something that we can't ignore any longer. As much as I would like to ignore it and not give it the credibility, it's a real conversation now. And it's largely led by Danielle Smith.
Can you help us understand that? Because I just want to say, like, it makes me feel a bit naive because I feel like through all this kind of Trump wanting to turn us into the 51st state thing, it's like I got swept up in the, like, now I'm feeling wistful about my Timmy's double and I'm, all in. And it's like and in fairness to Danielle Smith, she is picking up on something that is not immaterial within the Alberta electorate, right? There are people who have a slightly different reaction that isn't sort of that kind of, oh, we're Canada, all hail Mike Myers. It's this, it's something more pissed off. It's something that's actually pushing them out of that identity. Can you help me understand more of why that's happening for some folks in Alberta?
Well,
Erika can
I was
probably,
going to say, I
Erika can
am that
explain
person.
this. Yeah, Erika can explain this quite well.
Tell me more.
Yeah, so I think that's
why are you
yeah.
so jaded? What's wrong?
Well, no, I think it's everyone was right saying, there is this oil and gas. We have for the last decade felt like Ottawa was pushing back and making everything that we were trying to do, get our product to market, interprovincial trade, which everyone I think it was exposed to with the US. It was like almost at a place where it was like enough is enough. And this isn't just credit to Danielle Smith of getting to this sentiment. I think, she's obviously, to Cheryl's point, some of those things she is stoking right now. But Jason Kenney came out with the exact same platform and policy. He was the one that challenged C-69, the No More Pipelines Act, C-48, no more no tanker ban, which would impact obviously BC. So I think that from an Albertan's perspective, it's like we want to be a part of Canada. We want to be like that economic driver. But to Geoff's point, like we don't get any of it back. And we've gone through our own version of recessions where we didn't get the handout from Ottawa. We had to continue to pay other people. And so now it's at a place, and I am not leading a charge in any way, shape, or form, but even after the election, I think people in Alberta, especially with Pierre's numbers, were really hoping that we'd see a change, that our relationship would be repaired. Now, I don't think anyone could get a worse relationship than what we had with Justin Trudeau, and I am optimistic that the new Prime Minister can work with Danielle Smith, and that is her job. Her job is to try and get the best deal for Alberta within Canada. But I sit here and I'm just like, well, how much do you keep giving? Like I say it's like a bad relationship where one partner's putting all of this stuff in and the other one's like, okay, I'll just take you for granted and walk all over you. And so now it's at a place where I am personally like, I want to have the conversation. I want to know if our whole province, or at least a majority, believe that we are being treated unfair. Meanwhile, I also hope that conversation never comes to fruition because our premier has worked with the prime minister. He's said a lot of great things. He said in a meeting with her that he was going to repeal or amend C-69. He has since said something different, and I think that's also frustrating, is to have that flip-flop that we saw from the Liberals for the last 2 decades. But again, I'm optimistic that we can get to a place in negotiations. I don't think Alberta ever got all that it wanted. It didn't under Stephen Harper. So why would we expect someone that was living in Alberta? But there is a true frustration, and people that are not UCP members, do not probably vote federally conservative, have talked to me about how frustrated they are. So I think it's now at a point that it's beyond, obviously still heavily conservative voters or UCP supporters, but this is going beyond party lines. And that's why I think it's really real now, and not just, the hypothetical, like the Western alienation cleavage that we all learned in school or as we're learning about parts of Canada.
Guess pub quiz time. How old does something need to be in order to be considered vintage? You should know the term refers to more than an Instagram filter or a type of furniture, and its definition is actually quite precise. An item is considered vintage once it's 20 years old. And in 2025, that includes a few things that may make you feel old. Because the first YouTube video, first Twilight novel, the Xbox 360, and arguably skinny jeans are now officially vintage. And this month, TELUS is celebrating its 20th annual TELUS Days of Giving, a month-long movement of global volunteerism that not only addresses immediate community needs, but also fosters a year-round culture of volunteerism. Through activities including shoreline cleanups, tree planting, blood donation, device recycling, and food bank support, TELUS Days of Giving bring together team members, retirees, families, and customers to make meaningful differences in their communities. It's North America's largest volunteering initiative, and in 2024 alone, TELUS Days of Giving logged a record 1.5 million volunteer hours. Because TELUS integrates social purpose at the core of its business strategy, reinforcing its commitment to helping communities and ecosystems thrive for generations to come. Join TELUS this May as they continue their legacy as the world's most giving company. Whether you're cleaning shorelines, mentoring youth, or recycling technology, every hour makes a difference. Together, let's help make the future friendly. So, and I want to pick up on you're expressing some optimism, that this could change, with a new leader, that Justin Trudeau really certainly was a lightning rod for that divide. And Mark Carney, extreme Laurentian elite bona fides notwithstanding, is a different person. And now we have Pierre Poilievre as the leader of the opposition, potentially becoming, based in Alberta. And I'm curious, and let's just say, maybe I'll play a little bit of political conjecture too and say, if into the future we're moving to a place where then Pierre Poilievre is the prime minister in waiting, could we navigate a trajectory where the temperature comes down on this? Or is it really that Albertans are going to need to see something substantive change, in sort of particularly the affordability of their lives and the ease of their lives right now and the economy in Alberta before anything will change?
Can I just offer?
Yeah.
Sorry, Eric, I just want
Go
to jump
ahead.
in
No,
quick
go.
to say it is not in Danielle Smith's political interest for this
to go away.
For that
Yeah.
tension between her and Ottawa to go away.
Yeah.
And I imagine that she would like to continue up until the next election, and for her to be able to seek a mandate to continue to hammer Ottawa in the next election and use that as sort of like the ballot box question, like who's best to stand up to Ottawa, because it will naturally be her. Like she has built, like I said, her entire political personality on this. It will naturally be her. And so there is no upside for her politically. And we know if you watch Danielle Smith, she does everything in her own political interest. There's no upside to her standing down on this battle with Ottawa.
Yeah, Cheryl actually asked me on a podcast if Danielle Smith wants Mark Carney to win. So to that point, I said no, and it is no. But Cheryl's right. She sees her opponent being Mark Carney. Now there is leverage. Like Alberta's in a place where we kind of have the carrot right now, and it's up to Mark Carney to come to us and navigate that. To your point, Kate, though, I think that there is things like I don't think, or I hope that we're not expecting the whole laundry list in Alberta. If we're going to get everything we want, there is things like C69, which is probably the biggest one. Let us build pipelines. Let us get our product to market, and then we're happy to give you all the money when we're not able to afford a home, not able to, where we're not that have province that we've kind of always been. Or at least until the 90s, 2000s. And so I think we want to be a part of the team, but we also don't want to feel like we're operating with our hand tied behind our back. And so if you remove C69, I think that would be a big symbol. We don't need, and I think C48 would be another one that would be on the table. But I think that allows to say, we're going to let you guys operate. We're going to use your product, because right now the East doesn't even use the West oil and petroleum. And so it's like letting us laissez-faire, get government out of our way and stop being in our jurisdiction would go a long way. I know there's a lot of other items on there, but I think that would be a symbol of good faith from the federal government that they want to let us prosper.
I'm just laughing because
you always
building a
laughs at me.
pipeline to Tidewater wasn't any kind of, sorry for the trigger warning, no trigger warning, Geoff. Building a pipeline to Tidewater was not a symbol of good faith. Like they built a pipeline to Tidewater, they bought it and built it, but not a good enough symbol.
But if we're talking political, Cheryl, I think we have to realize that, you guys get to have that note, right? You get to have that feather in your cap as you have campaigned. So if Danielle Smith wants to go into the next election, I think it's, she wants to also be able to be building a pipeline, because that, for no lack of a better term, trumps that the NDP were ones that kind of were a part of getting it done.
I don't really understand the logic of Alberta separation argument, because you would think that getting market access will be harder.
Yes.
If they left Canada. I mean, the only option it leads to is joining the United States.
Yeah, and we talked about this last week, in length, about what I want to have the conversation, but I want to see if Albertans actually want to explore this. That comes with a lot of education of what is our infrastructure, what is our military. Most people surveyed, and Mike, you might have some insight with your work into this, don't want to be the 51st state. So then you're like, okay, then what? And so you'd have to set up policing, pension, healthcare, all of your infrastructure, things that I think people right now are emotionally driven by, but will need the proof in the pudding to be able to actually make an educated decision.
There was a time, and Geoff and I will remember because we're so ancient, that, in the 1980s, Western alienation was the West was unified in that argument. BC very much felt similarly to Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba. It's not the way anymore. Like BC has kind of set sail on that. And maybe there's two BCs here I'm talking about. There's Metro
Mm.
Vancouver, which is more joined with Toronto, basically, in terms of a lot of our values, and the rest of like the interior BCs feels sympathetic to Alberta. But we're not seized by alienation here. I think we're just fickle about federal politics generally. What do you think,
Mhm.
Geoff? My
No, I would agree with that. I mean, I lived briefly in Alberta back in a long time ago, and heard bits about it even then, but I haven't heard that. I almost never heard about it in BC. Very briefly with when I worked for Glenn Clark, and he was working with running into Reform Party members in the interior who were very aligned with what Preston Manning
yeah.
and others were talking about at that time. But that never caught fire or gained momentum as it did periodically in a small way in Alberta. And I think the current one too is it's very interesting hearing what you're saying, Eric, because the pre-election comments by Preston Manning and the laying out of a sort of a strategic agenda in support of Smith to say, well, there should be a big conference and we should talk about what it would look like, and there should be maybe some kind of a constituent assembly. These are all things that in a funny way are doable in Alberta, but not here because the political infrastructure in Alberta is so robust around that conservative side stuff, including what I would call generally sort of the intellectual and extra parliamentary part. Like there's a lot of intellectuals and professors and economists and stuff in Alberta who are sympathetic to this thinking, or at least will treat it seriously, write about it, comment on it, raise issues. To the degree that that exists here, there's no such commentary or anything, right? So, that it was an issue where you could see that even Jason Kenney had to play defense without success on a very significant current of Alberta opinion, which I just don't perceive here.
I
I
think,
don't think it could be created very easily.
yeah, yeah. No, I think this moment in time is solidifying a key difference. Like, I think in BC, we feel taken for granted. In Alberta, they feel used. And it's interesting because there's a sort of resentment that's stoking this right now, and it's like you want to complain about housing prices in Calgary. I live in Vancouver. Let's have a beer, right? Like, but that difference does really inform where you lay the blame and how the politics of this issue right now are so different between two alienated Western provinces. Can I pivot this though to talking about the relationship between the premiers? I mean, right? Like, and we can start with Daniel Smith and David Eby, who have had some success. I think, not like the two people I'd pick to set up on a political blind date, but like have had some success. I'm going to name. There was the deal with BC Wines, right? That has actually been hugely successful for the wine sector here. I did know the data at some point, but I'm gonna apologize for jet lag and say I don't have them handy. But they're like that deal was struck earlier this year, and sales soared for BC wineries, and at the same time there was extra tax revenue for Alberta. Like there's some stuff, and this is sort of I think probably one of the earliest wins on interprovincial trade that we've seen within Canada. So maybe these two are an unlikely, are they going to be able to, Cheryl, do you see any opportunity maybe for David Eby and Daniel Smith to be able to move more on this interprovincial trade issue and show that unlikely allies can make good things happen?
Yeah, I do. I think they have had some quiet meetings that were pretty successful. They're not standing up, holding hands, signing any, public MOUs at this point, but I do think there's things like environmental assessment, or maybe in the future, it's not going to happen anytime soon, but electricity interties across the province, talking about how we use BC's clean energy. And then future trade barriers, like the wine thing was a really big deal. Like it seems like common sense, but like little wins that turn into big things for industry and are really good proof points for the provinces working together. I do think there's room on both sides for them to be able to do that, and both sides seem willing to. And David Eby is just not as convenient a political target. Like Daniel Smith has one, so she has to have friends somewhere, or it begins to look like ridiculous. So I think, yeah, so far it seems to have worked okay, and I think it will continue to work okay.
I think Cheryl's making a really important point because those places for collaboration are much more tangible than getting rid of some interprovincial trade barrier that none of us have noticed up till now. And the
Mhm.
intertie thing, the possibility of using renewables from Alberta, which are the wind and other investments that Alberta has made very successfully, combined with Site C, which is dispatchable power, may be a much more powerful combination than people have really realized. Some people are following up on it, and it could even support reducing the carbon in fossil fuel production and natural gas. And if they made really substantive gains in those discussions, that could be very helpful for both provinces.
Gas or electric? How about all the above? Lately, I've been talking about how much we rely upon our province's gas and electricity systems working together. We need both systems working together to safely, reliably, and affordably meet the needs of British Columbians. And if you're a FortisBC customer that qualifies, you can have all of the above, gas and electric. Last year, FortisBC introduced a new rebate program for eligible customers who replaced their home's older gas heating system with an electric heat pump and high-efficiency furnace. Sure, I'll do a fist pump over a heat pump, especially when paired with a high-efficiency furnace. How's that work? A dual fuel system or hybrid provides whole home heating and cooling and is a good option for homeowners who are replacing an aging gas furnace and want to upgrade to a reliable and efficient system, keeping their home comfortable year-round. It includes an electric heat pump for cooling during warm weather and space heating during milder conditions, and a high-efficiency gas furnace for heating during those cold BC winter days. So just like our provincial energy systems, you get the advantages of both gas and electricity at the household level to ensure your home energy remains affordable, efficient, and reliable. Kind of like a hybrid car, gas and electric working together. This dual fuel offering is part of FortisBC's commitment to offer the next generation of rebates for high-efficiency technologies and systems to help achieve provincial climate action goals by harnessing the strengths of both energy systems. Find a full list of rebates and energy efficiency information at fortisbc.com/rebates. FortisBC, energy for a better BC and a better podcast.
I see that there's more like low-hanging fruit in this situation where, to the point of food producers, what we have in Alberta is not necessarily what BC has. I think there's a lot more give and take, which is, we all know Cheryl doesn't like Danielle Smith, but that you can have that relationship because there is a give and take, which is maybe different than the way Danielle Smith sees her relationship with Ottawa. And I mean, the other thing, let's just realize the reason why separation would be so hard is because we're landlocked. This is our gateway, for lack of a better term. And so building that relationship on that mutual benefit of things like electricity, of, like you said, even, I mean, wine, like the food producer industry, economic corridors, can really benefit both provinces. So I think this is more of something like, put the ideological differences aside, because it's a win-win for these two leaders.
Mike, anything to add to that?
Well, I mean, I think clearly when we look at Alberta and BC, Alberta needs more from BC than BC needs from Alberta. I mean, granted, we do benefit a lot from the oil sands and the revenues they produce for the whole country. There's a lot of British Columbians that work in the oil sands, so don't want to minimize that. But getting resources to Tidewater is a pretty big deal. And, you know, I went through this working with Christy when Christy laid out 5 conditions that she wanted to see for either Northern Gateway or Kinder Morgan at the time, reaching Tidewater. And those are pretty modest conditions in hindsight, and met with very stiff resistance from Premier Redford. And thank you, Premier Redford. It practically got us elected, that big fight we had. But we were surprised. I remember at the time that just how vociferous Redford's response was. It wasn't a performative show at all. It was like a genuine, like, she was really mad and we stood our ground. And that just showed me kind of how deep, you can call it entitlement maybe, or call it just, this is our right to get our resources out to Tidewater. But I think it's going to take negotiation. It's going to take First Nations. It's going to take a lot of cooperation to make that happen. I think the will is there a lot more than it used to be. I think the will be there with the federal government more now because they need the dollars, and there's national unity component to it. And I think the BC government's kind of with the U.S. trade situation is easing up on the issue. So hope maybe there's an alignment here that good things will happen. But we don't always start in the same place, that's for sure.
No, we don't. Well, so let's tuck into some of what is similar right now between BC and Alberta, because I want to go back to the election results, the federal election results, and just look at some of the trends. One of the things we've been talking a lot about on our pod here, and it relates to the federal election and our recent provincial election, is sort of the changing dynamics with the ethnic vote, and sort of particularly sort of support for the Liberals seeming to soften within that space. And actually, I think that's a lot of the story out of Ontario for sure. Is that a trend you're seeing in Alberta? And then are there any particular issues that maybe are changing that vote that might be distinct to Alberta?
I think so. I mean, I won't try to speak on behalf of any particular community, but I can speak to how I think the last couple of elections played out in Alberta and how communities, especially communities in Calgary, because there are a few ridings in Calgary that are really dominated by Southeast Asian communities. And that is the biggest ethnic community. And campaigning in those ridings is completely different. And I know that's the case in British Columbia as well. So it's not necessarily that like those groups have been allegiant to progressives and now that allegiance is gone. It's that whoever was campaigning there listened to what they wanted, made a really good pitch for what they wanted, and convinced really influential people in that riding to vote for what they wanted. And so, like, I give them credit for not necessarily saying we're like ride or die liberals or we're ride or die New Democrats. They're looking for a government that will deliver for them what that specific community looked for. And where you see the softening is where the other side did a better job at offering that and a better job at campaigning on it.
Yeah, and I think it was a thinner line than maybe us just saying that. But I mean, where Cheryl's talking about is George Chahal's riding, that flipped, obviously. Like as we were watching, I was quite surprised to see all of Northeast Calgary go blue. I was also surprised to see maybe not that the mayor's so he in Edmonton, there was a little bit of a protest vote against him for leaving as mayor at the second time. He's left twice. So I can't say that that fits the case study, but even that area of Southeast Edmonton doing the exact same. So I don't know if it has to do with, what Pierre was promising or what he did from an ethnic outreach, from his campaign strategies. But I think that it definitely was prevalent in both of our major urban cities in the last election.
I'll try and draw an analogy to what we saw in BC because I think it's very similar to what you're referencing in Calgary. I was surprised that George Chahal lost and disappointed actually for Alberta because I think he would have been well positioned to serve Alberta probably in cabinet, given a Mark Carney government. But the Liberals lost their grip on that seat in Northeast Calgary with, as Cheryl, you said, a very high South Asian population. And in Surrey, even though the Liberals held their 3 seats in North Surrey, they gave up a lot of votes to the Conservatives. Like they were winning seats by 30 points last time. They won by 5 this time. They still won them. But that South Asian vote and the Chinese vote in Richmond really moved against the Liberals in the favor of the Conservatives. Yet in South Surrey, where it's mainly Caucasian and older, a lot of 55 plus voters, the Liberals pick up a seat in Carrie Lynn Finley's seat in South Surrey White Rock. And I'm wondering if that's an analogy to Calgary Confederation too, which the Liberals pick up that seat. Is that mainly a less diverse, more Caucasian seat? Yeah.
You're right.
So,
Yeah.
So, I mean, we do see, I think across the country, we saw a gravitation towards the Liberals among older voters and Caucasian voters who, for some reason, were more seized by the Trump stuff. And, broad brush theory that some of the younger voters and diverse voters more seized by affordability, more seized by day-to-day life issues that Poilievre was really speaking to. And like, as a pollster, it's really confounding in a way to see what was really a consensus view for a lot of years. Like, you start out as a lefty and you end up as a conservative in life. That's how it's supposed to work, right? It's now backwards. So, like, that's a pretty big change. And the fact that the Conservatives made so much progress in the diverse communities. So I see those parallels between BC and Alberta.
Can I ask another parallel of the group? Was something that we saw was like how significant the collapse, or maybe even just like have you guys answer this question because I find it fascinating, was the collapse of the NDP. I was surprised, especially in BC in the interior, how much it went from the union vote transferred to Conservatives versus what I think people thought would be, a fall to the Liberals. So we didn't see that. Maybe, I don't know, Cheryl, if you did in Calgary. We usually just, as conservatives in Edmonton, pray for a vote split. So it wasn't, as feasible here. But yeah, like I'm so shocked at how many ridings I saw go blue. And that I was told it's union vote. I'm not sure if that's accurate.
Go ahead, Mike.
Well,
I can chime in
like,
too.
no,
well,
thanks.
the one region we've talked a lot about on our pod is Vancouver Island.
Yeah.
And in the South Island, two of the three ridings, well, two of the two NDP seats flipped to the Liberals. Again, lots of older white voters. In a more urban setting, went to the Liberals. But once you get to more rural areas north of Victoria, they flipped Conservative. 3 out of 4 flipped to the Conservatives. And I don't think the Conservative popular vote went up that much. I think it was just a collapse of the NDP and there was a vote split. So the Liberals came up quite a bit, but not enough to win. The NDP fell back enough to lose, and the Conservatives might have gone from like 35 to 39% or something like that. So you definitely saw those situations that the Conservatives benefited from this time, and they, won some seats that way. I think there are some instances of the blue collar vote going from, NDP to Conservative, but to me, the real movement was in the suburbs in those diverse communities. That's where the numbers, the needle really moved. And you can call that a blue collar vote too, perhaps. It's not the one that people imagine, though. They're thinking like, guys going to the factory or the sawmill, and now they're all of a sudden voting Conservative. It wasn't that so much.
I mean, there's
mind.
there's better examples of that in Ontario for sure. And that's what Hamilton and Windsor are, right? But that's, I think, what's interesting because BC has some of that. And I would agree with what Mike said. Like I think it's easy to overstate how much that kind of union vote went orange to blue. It did. But it wasn't kind of like the Conservatives didn't get out of the NDP collapse what the Liberals got out of the NDP collapse, right? BC's kind of interesting though, because yeah, we do have these it plays out really differently on the island versus how it plays out in the burbs here. And when you watch the map, when I was watching the map come in on election night, I was sort of trying to figure out like, are we going to look like Windsor, or are we going to look like more like Northern Toronto and those types of places, and it splits, right? We're both in BC.
I think one of the interesting things is that the Conservatives both, certainly federally, made an overt appeal to working people. And I agree with the comments that you got the union aspect is overemphasized. I mean, the hard news for us two Democrats is that for many, many, many years, while the leadership of some unions were very pro NDP, the membership were just like any other British Columbians in the way they broke on a voting day. What we see here is the decline sharply of resource unions that used to provide a base for us in the interior, like members of pulp unions or members of the IWA, now the steelworkers, or I can give other examples. So it's a very clean shot actually in BC for not Jason Kenney, but Pierre Poilievre to make an appeal that has a lot of hard hats in it and visvests and pipes and stuff, because that will identify with what is still a pretty unionized workforce in terms of infrastructure projects, but also signal to people that he's fine and very comfortable with working people generally, union or non-union, and that becomes validated by union leaders who then support the Conservatives, because that's surprising. What I think is interesting in the suburbs is that those are working class people based on their income and their access to all kinds of privileges and power compared to upper middle income people. And they are going there too for reasons that New Democrats have not taken seriously enough, in my opinion. Concerns about crime and concerns about other changes, including gender identity and so on, that New Democrats have not been nuanced enough or careful enough to manage carefully. And that's been a big help to the Conservatives in ridings that, well, we've talked a bit about the North Island as a good example.
There's quite a bit of overlap between the provincial election results and the federal election results in BC in terms of how the map changed in favor of the Conservatives, right, Geoff? Like
Yeah.
like in Surrey and places like that, that the federal results kind of followed the script.
Well, I think a comment on our pod that when the anti-scab bill came forward, which was brought forward by the NDP federally under their CASA agreement, their confidence supply agreement, I said, well, we'll find out whether Pierre Poilievre is actually pro-union if he supports anti-scab, and he did. I mean, it used to be the case that conservative parties would be overtly anti-union and campaign to stop union expansion and implement changes that would hurt union organizing. But you don't hear that anymore. Now, Poilievre's not out there rushing to union conventions very often, but he's not taking political positions that would allow the labor movement to say, you see, he hates unions. Here in BC, we've had anti-scab law for a long, long time. And the one thing that employers have understood for a long time, in my view, is that if they tamper with that, they will set off a fire they may not be able to control. You can do a lot of other things here in BC, but if you change that, everybody gets that I could really be a loser in that scenario. And so Gordon Campbell wouldn't change it, even though he was often asked to. And I think that was to me a really important test of Poilievre's strategic savvy, which was not to fall for that. He didn't, roar around the territory saying, "Hey, I'm really going to back this anti-scab bill." But when push came to shove, he did, and an important stick was taken away from the union movement at that point.
And it should be said for Poilievre that like their campaign in BC in many ways was a success. They gained more seats. They gained about 8 points in the popular vote. They came very close to winning a whole bunch of seats in the burbs, which is, close only counts in, horseshoes and hand grenades. But, the Liberals clung on to some of those seats because of the NDP's collapse. And so, if they're able to entrench those gains, they're set up well for next time. But in most the ridings where they made the biggest gains in vote, they still lost. They just shrunk that gap considerably in places like Surrey, Burnaby, Richmond, those kind of places. So, cold consolation for the Conservatives, but they're set up well for next time, frankly.
Well, and go ahead.
Well, I have a quick question for the Alberta crew because we saw our provincial Conservatives nearly get there with a quite disorganized campaign where there were a lot of so-called bozo eruptions and problems about people expressing views that are almost mainstream in the UCP. And I just wondered, looking at that, if you folks think there's going to be a time when the BC Conservative Party learns how to manage all those changes, as they seem to have to agree in the UCP, or whether it'll be a case, as Jason Kenney said, of the lunatics running the asylum in the BC Conservative Party. Because if you look at the federal campaign, as Mike says, it was very disciplined, like super disciplined. Nobody went to a all candidates debate or even gave a short interview without permission. Very much a free speech zone in the BC Conservative Party, to their sorrow, in my opinion. What do you think is going to happen here? What's your prediction?
So I look at the BC Conservatives, and if you want to compare them to Alberta, like Alberta is such a professionalized organization. Like the UCP, relatively new, in Alberta's history, but the people who are working in it have experienced decades and decades of experience in politics and know how to put on a good show and know how to avoid, for the most part. I mean, there always still are a lot of bozo eruptions, many from Danielle Smith herself in the last campaign. But it's tightly managed as much as they can. And the Conservatives in BC just didn't have that. Like they came up so fast, they could not control their popularity and growth as quickly as it came in, at least from the outside looking in. And I imagine that they will start to smooth that out over time. They'll smooth it out or they will cease to exist. Like they have to figure out those things. They have, until the next election to professionalize and learn how to control that stuff and get rid of the people who are most likely to do it. And Alberta's just had so much more time to do that, and also has the benefit of being what a lot of Albertans see as the natural governing party. So I don't think it's impossible for the BC Conservatives to get to that point, but from my vantage point, they were a long way from that in the last election.
Mm-hmm. As the person that managed issues for the UCP in 2023, thank you, Cheryl. It didn't feel like we were nailing it all the time, but we got there. Yeah. But yeah, I think that just the infrastructure that we used at the UCP, especially given that Jason Kenney came from the Conservative Party of Canada campaign machine, was easier to digest. But even when I look back, and I was founding president of the UCP, the 2019 election was, even though it was our path to victory, was a lot bumpier and a lot harder than once we formed government. We had, some wins under our belts, things like that, and never too much time to candidate vet, but did actually have a different process for our nomination rules, which means something to us inside baseball people, not to the general public. But as president, it was painful in 2019. I had to go talk to several candidates that chose to resign.
There's lawsuits still going from 19.
Yeah.
You were voluntold?
I cannot comment. But they're no longer with us, nor did they have a name on a ballot. But it was a lot. I think we had 4 candidates in the first go. Party discipline is a huge thing. I think that, one word I hate as a conservative is grassroots, because it usually just means like my way or the highway. And so I think that I can only speak for the right side of things, that is always something to balance. But if the BC Conservatives want to stay relevant, you have to learn how to toe a line. You not have to know to trust people in your war room. You can't go rogue. It doesn't help, even if you don't think you'll ever get a cabinet position, so you don't care. Because the UCP still has to work through that.
So one more question, just while we have the two of you here, I'd love to pick your brains to help us poor BCers try and understand where Danielle Smith is going next. Because I think, give us your best thinking. Because I just want to name so this Trump kind of prevailing wind, for the next Alberta election, for the next federal election, is still going to be there, right? We're kind of early on in a 4-year term with that. And so I think fair to say some of how Danielle Smith behaves leading up into the next Alberta election and some of what Parpelyev is going to have to deal with is going to be shaped by that. And I'm wondering if for Danielle Smith, now that she's put this kind of, and I think she's been very coy in how she's done it, but putting the separatist issue on the table in a way that, she's not trying to own it. I think she's trying to say, I'm open to it. She's sort of, right? She's being
what she wants you to believe.
Cheryl feels differently.
I know but certainly this is how she's positioning herself. And so I want to ask, going forward, what does that mean for how she's likely to work with the Prime Minister and the other premiers?
Cheryl, you can go first because I know you have feelings for this one.
So many feelings. So Danielle Smith, there's a couple of things. Danielle Smith laid out her criteria for Mark Carney before the election was over, in terms of what he needs to achieve for Alberta to be happy. I mean, it's pretty tough to achieve those things, like guaranteed tidewater access on every coast. It's pretty hard, even if you had a magic wand. I don't know how you would make that possible, at least in the amount of time that Danielle Smith is looking for. So she's kind of set herself up to be able to say that Ottawa failed before the cabinet was even sworn in. And I think that probably plays well into her ongoing political narrative. She needs this to continue to be what Albertans are talking about, because just as she hoped, we're not talking about what is the biggest scandal going on in Alberta, which it would take a whole nother episode, but there's a big scandal around health procurement in Alberta right now, with an RCMP investigation, an ethics commissioner investigation, a public, not quite public inquiry, but a third party inquiry going on that the government would not like anyone to look at. And so they have to make a lot of noise in other places. And this is a really good place to make noise and has worked to her political benefit for a long time. She currently is launching a What's Next panel where she has framed it as going around and talking to Albertans about how Alberta exists inside a united Canada and what's next for us. But it really is like a crowdsourcing of referendum questions. Is there anything people would like to see on a ballot if we had a referendum? And she has, like I said, lowered the bar for citizen-initiated referendum questions to 177,000 votes. And there already are groups very actively organizing around a separation question on the referendum. So there's a real chance that comes at the next opportunity, which is likely the fall municipal election, comes as a question to Albertans. So all of this is sort of, I mean, plays into Danielle Smith's Alberta versus Ottawa narrative and her continuing to be the champion for Alberta.
Yeah,
Erika?
shockingly, I don't agree with everything Cheryl said, or probably even half. But I do think that what we're going to see from Danielle Smith is going to continue to be a dance. Like, she came out pretty hard on the prime minister, didn't really congratulate him. But then her next post was like, I had a productive meeting. She's kind of going back and forth, I think, to see how he reacts. Now, he's appointed his cabinet. I don't think that the cabinet appointment, it's not Guilbeault as like Minister of Energy or something like that. I think that, LeBlanc is someone that the Premier has said she's worked well with, and I think there's going to be some overlap there. So I don't think that the cabinet was actually an FU to Alberta in any way. And so I suspect that she's going to continue, as she should. Like, her job is to unify Alberta, and the Prime Minister's got what I think is probably even a harder job, which is unify our entire country. That we're going to see a dance back and forth, and for her too, and I hope, stay out of the way of this referendum. I do agree that the thresholds were way too high. Timing, little suspicious. Maybe just call a spade a spade. They were bringing it in anyway, but I just, as a comms person, I'm like, just get in front of it. Just say you held it from the federal election and now you're bringing it forward, and let democracy hold true. I don't want to see her influencing it. So I'm kind of happy with the position she's taken, that she's like, my job as Premier is to work on the mandate, which is to get Alberta's the best deal we can with our federal counterparts. But I don't think we're going to see her pick a lane anytime soon, one way or the other, even if it does come to a referendum question.
The
and
appointment
I
of
just,
the appointment of Tim Hodgson as the Natural Resources Minister does seem
Yeah.
pretty intriguing, given that
Yeah, he is very Carney 2.0, hey? But I don't think do you see it as a FU? I didn't read it that way.
not nephew at all.
Okay,
I
yeah.
see it as he's a Goldman Sachs guy who's been on major pension boards, but also I think was on the board of Meg Energy,
Yeah.
big oil and gas producer in Alberta.
Yeah.
And so I think, well, that's a signal. Like, he's a rookie. He was recruited to run by Carney. He was advised Carney at the Bank of Canada. Like, it seems like Carney's got a plan.
Yeah. Well, and if
Yeah.
you watched his press conference, Carney's, I thought it was interesting to hear him say, like, with even Trump, whoever is his minister, he's still going to be the prime minister and be dealing with the president. I think that you're going to see Carney also very much in this Alberta file, rightfully so. But I thought that was I thought his cabinet was actually fair, and I thought it was a good symbol to some of the work he's talked about doing, especially with Western Canada.
can I
Well,
can I just offer, just because I know
Poor
British
Kate.
Columbia, you're probably, sorry, Kate, you're not probably not
sorry.
watching
Yeah.
like the intricacies of like what the background politics is to this separatist movement and why Danielle Smith is so worried about it. And so I just wanted to offer like a tiny bit of that, because the Conservatives do well and have sort of close to guaranteed, not guaranteed re-election, better shot at re-election when they're united. And what's happening right now is that there is a group that is organizing around separatism. And if you take the polls for what they're sitting at right now, let's say 30% of Albertans are interested in separating, we can almost assume all of those people are Conservatives. That's a big chunk of the Conservative base that is not necessarily aligned with where the UCP could end up sitting. And they're currently organizing around a separate political party, which is calling itself the Republican Party of Alberta. What's really, really dangerous for Danielle Smith in the lead up to the next election is if a big portion of her base, this 30% of Alberta, goes off and rallies behind a party and signs up as members of a party that is dedicated to separating from Alberta. Now we have a vote split that makes election of the NDP much, much easier. And so, like she has from the beginning, she is doing everything she can to hold her party together as a united Conservative Party, and that will likely drive most of her positioning on this over the next couple of years.
Yeah, this has been very interesting. I love having you guys on to talk about this. I could talk about it more, but now I want to invite you back to our mini bar to grab a drink.
I'm down.
Excellent. Excellent. I figured. So yeah, what we do is at the end of the show, we come back to the hotel mini bar, and we usually we raise a glass or we take a shot against someone we're seeing in politics doing something we think is great or something we want to slag. Do you want me to give you guys a hot minute? I'll get the guys to kick us off.
Yeah.
All right. Mike, you ready to go this week?
I am. I usually cheat. I do too sometimes.
You usually cheat, like
I'm going to raise a
statistically. Yeah.
glass to Erika because I just
Oh.
learned that she is an elected senator in waiting from Alberta and received 358,000 votes in 2021 in Alberta's very unique senatorial election. So, Erika, I'm very impressed. And some of our listeners, long-suffering listeners of Hotel Pacifico, know that I do like to prattle on about the Senate at times. So here I am prattling on in a very positive way. So raise a glass to Erika. Not to you, Cheryl. Sorry, you got to run. You got to run to get a
I'll
glass.
take this one. That's okay.
But I will take
This
a
is
shot.
painful for her.
I will take a shot at the Liberal government because the cabinet representation from BC and Alberta is
Mhm.
weak, to say the least. And I realize we get what we send to Ottawa. He can only work with what we send. And in BC's case, 16 out of 20 were men. And so there's a real gender math problem, given that they want to do a gender equal cabinet. And we just didn't send a lot of front bench material, frankly, from BC. And Alberta only sent two. But having said that, I'd like to see the Liberal Party work harder to recruit candidates who can be front benchers and get them elected. And we've seen it in the not too distant past. And particularly Paul Martin did a very good job at this. And Justin Trudeau's first term started off with a justice minister who eventually ran as an independent and quit the party, and a defense minister who subsequently got demoted. But at least he tried to put senior British Columbians in as front benchers. But so far, the Carney administration, BC's not starting off on a gallop.
Mhm. I hear Geoff.
That's my first salvo
Well,
to
I've got
separate.
a target-rich environment. I'll do a toast and a shot. Seeing Cheryl, they reminded me of Rachel Notley, so I wanted to toast Rachel Notley because hers was one of the first names that popped up when Jagmeet Singh retired, and I encountered more than one person who went, "Oh yeah, Rachel Notley, she'd be great," because when you Democrats were thinking, it's not a we're really at low ebb and we're kind of in deep trouble here. They realized they had people of Rachel Notley's quality who could have stepped up if she wanted to, but she's not for all kinds of reasons that I can imagine and respect. So I would raise a glass to her. I saw an introduction she did for Jagmeet at the tail end of the NDP campaign in Edmonton, and she was on fire. And she's just one of a number of other people out there in the NDP universe who are not at the federal level. But if they were, they would be very, redoubtable opponents for lots of people in the political system. So I'll raise a glass to Rachel Notley, even though she declined to go forward at this time. So, but I am worried and critical of some stuff that's going on in Victoria. According to Von Palmer, the head of the public service, Shannon Salter, had a town hall meeting on Zoom with all available public servants, apparently, to tell them that this is during bargaining, to tell them that the cupboard is bare and our deficit skyrocketing to hundreds of billions of dollars, 160 billion coming soon. And the BCGU, the union, in these very critical negotiations, appeared to be kind of caught flat-footed, put out a press release with spelling errors in it, had to put out a second press release. Anyway, these are not, this does not look good, in my opinion, for a super sensitive round of bargaining. And in the union movement, we call this a captive audience meeting. In other words, how can you say, actually, I'm busy, I'm doing my work, I'm not going to listen to the head of the public service? And it's considered very poor protocol to go around the union bargaining committee and speak directly to the employees, particularly about stuff that's so material to the bargaining. So I'm concerned and alarmed about the public sector bargaining and seeing how it's unfolding. There's very little reporting of it. And so we owe all that we know about it to Von Palmer. Perhaps there's another side, but I would say, hey, folks, so you got to straighten up and fly right here. This is not a good public beginning to the bargaining.
All right. Thanks, Geoff. Cheryl, you want to pick it up?
I'm just going to give the most obvious raise of a glass to you guys for having us on. It is so interesting to talk about all the differences between Alberta and BC and also talk about all the things that are the same because there is a lot of differences. Like I lived out in Victoria for a year. I felt the differences really starkly, but there's so many things that we have in common and so many things that we can share. And these kind of conversations are just so enlightening for all of that. So at the risk of being just so cliche, to you guys.
No
Cheryl, that was
complaints
awesome.
here.
Very much.
Yeah.
Cheryl, that was a hot take.
Well, everyone says that she's Ron McLean and I'm Don Cherry, so I'm gonna take a shot at Doug Ford, who I like to call PC, pretend conservative. And so
Oh.
to you, Doug Ford, please, please smarten up. Thank you.
Is there something particular that he did of recent that's irked you, or
I
is
think
this just a generic?
I didn't like the election. I didn't like, his whole attitude towards just like ass kissing Mark Carney, and how like he had people coming out, his former campaign manager, like
So you're not on
we
you're not
eat
on
our
team
own.
Oh,
you're
sorry.
not on team tonight.
No.
Well, you know what? I didn't disagree with a lot of stuff Corey said. I was just like, save it till the end. Like, or call Jenny or shit on her with your friends. Like, to me, it's like we are so bad at eating our own in the conservative movement. Why do we need to do it in the media during an election cycle?
Well, Erica, we could have Premier Smith's new pipelines to Tidewater, or we could have Doug Ford's nation-building project of tunneling under the 401.
I
for
know
60 miles.
exactly.
So I don't understand why you don't see the appeal of that.
Exactly. And Doug Ford is an equal opportunity ass kisser. Like, I don't know if we need to pick on him for going after Carney's
No,
ass
that
on
should be
one,
yours
but
too.
yeah. But we can come back to that. I love that. Okay, great. I am going to raise my glass partly because this is something I have been on and on about a gender balanced cabinet, and I am so happy to see Mark Carney continue that. And it really matters. It really matters, who's sitting around the table and making those decisions. And I have to kind of close the circle because you guys might. I've been complaining about it and kind of taking shots at him for not committing to it earlier. And then I want to say, I'll take it a little further and say what a pleasure it was to have both of you, Cheryl and Erika, on the pod. It's fun to have closer to gender, or I guess we're predominantly women for this pod, which is a lot of fun. And I really enjoyed this conversation. I feel like, awesome. There's too much more to cover. We'll have to make an excuse to do it again. But my glass is raised to the two of you.
Well, don't I just look like the jerk now?
No, I loved yours. No, and like,
Oh, that's great.
No, yours is why we have to have like another episode. Like, there's more there. It's really good. There's tons to talk about. So you're both great.
Awesome.
All right. So thank you, Cheryl and Erika, for joining us for the first ever Hotel Pacifico, the Discourse crossover podcast. To our presenting sponsor, TELUS and Fortis BC. We will see you next week. Guests, BC and Alberta. You can never leave.
We'll see.